the scripture, and that was the first, so I'm not going to read it again, but just want to set up a tone here too. In 1 Kings, I've entitled my message, Chasing After the Wind. I don't know if you're aware of a Canadian novel. It's Who Has Seen the Wind by W.O. Mitchell. Have you ever seen the wind? No, you can't. In 1 Kings 3:9, Solomon speaking, and he says, "Give me an understanding mind, so that I can govern your people well, and know the difference between right and wrong. For who by himself is able to govern this great nation of yours?" And basically, I've read the whole book of Ecclesiastes, and I'm trying to crowd so much in such a little time. But the book of Ecclesiastes, basically from chapter 1 to 12, is his experiments in life, and he has more life behind him than in front of him. And I think we can identify with that. I certainly can. And I think when we look at it, Ecclesiastes is a comment on man and his nature with God and without God. And, one thing that caught my attention this morning, I was listening to the news, and, it said, whoever loves money never has money enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. And, what goes on today, particularly south of the border, I don't know, would shocking be the proper word? I don't know. Anyway, to set the tone, I think it's Psalm 24, verse 1. "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof," or in other words, everything in it. "And the world and all who live in it," that includes you and me, "even if you don't believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and God, He's still your Father. You just don't know it." And, it's interesting. I was doing my final preparation this morning, and I turned the news on CBC, and I don't know if you heard it, but there's this new toy out. I think it was called the Boy, a furry little monster from China, and all of a sudden the world's crazy over it, and everybody's going to have one. Anyways, that's how, and it's just because that's how I was going to start my message. I just have to have this or that. It's the in thing. It's the hottest item at the moment. Everybody has one, and I don't. It's kind of terrible. I'll be shunned. I'll lose some of my friends. It's so disturbing to me. Whatever will I do? And if you remember the pet rock and a can of Canadian Air a few years ago, basically it was a rock. Put it in a can with a label on it, and then there was this can of air with a label on it, and it sold like hotcakes. Everybody had to have one. And somebody came up with the idea, marketed it, and basically they became quite wealthy on the backs of the gullible when you come right down to it. And we see this type of behavior, especially around Christmas time, where some doll or toy becomes the focus of the season, and people gotta have this or that for their children. And even sometimes physical battles break out. We're going to beat you to death for a doll or something like that. And they just have to have those. And those who have it feel really good, and your kids are all happy and stuff. And those who have it, they just feel so disappointed. But the book of Ecclesiastes, even though it was written a few years ago, like 25 or 2,600 years ago, it delves into life's meaning. Although written back then, it's still relevant today for us because it deals with the following items. It deals with fatalism. Whatever will be, will be. It deals with existentialism. You hear this word all the time. I don't even know what it means half the time. But live for the present. Who knows what tomorrow is going to bring? It talks about chauvinism. Men are better than women. When I did a message here I guess it was in May, I had this girl that I know, she's in Moncton, and she was getting angry at me because, wives submit to your husband, but it's so misunderstood, isn't it, when you come down to it? And there's hedonism, live for pleasure, and there's cynicism. Everything good, is not really what it seems to be. And then there's pessimism, great today, but things are only going to get worse. This is a great mindset. But Ecclesiastes, in many ways, it seems like a strange book. The important thing is to look at it in context. You know, you can take this out of context, you can take something else out of context. And if you do, it begins to mean different things to different people. But Solomon is considered the author of Ecclesiastes. The man is aging. There is more behind him than there is in front of him. It's the end of his life, basically. And Solomon, who's also the author of Proverbs, he's a middle-aged man. He's writing stuff to stop his son and others from committing the same mistakes that he had made, which is a good thing. And he wrote songs of songs, too, when he was a young man. And on first reading of the book, it seems to really express disappointment, disillusionment, helplessness. When you say everything is meaningless, man, oh man, it gets your attention. And he writes it in the first person, too. He observes or meditates his life gone by. And when I was making my notes, I put question. Do you ever do that yourself? Sit down and say, you know, here I am, and such an age. What have I done in life? Where am I going? What's going on? And it's not a bad thing to do. And as he ages, he's looking at the things he's done. You know, what's going on? What's it all about? Is life worth living? What's my legacy going to be? And, you know, that's a pretty tough question. So as the book opens, meaningless, says the teacher, utter, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. It's not exactly a system opening. If we stop there, it would just cast a very dark, negative, pessimistic, hopeless shadow on life. And it would cause life to be a pall. It would be so black. But meaningless, and I like this translation better, can also be translated as emptiness. And I think that's a good word to capture the spirit of what's going on here. How would you feel as your life ends and you think your life was pointless and useless? Not a good place to be. Solomon was king, and he had absolute power and wealth. And as a result, he could do as he pleased, and he did. And he indulged himself in all sorts of pleasures of life. He did it in science and agriculture and arts. And by the way, I encourage you when you go home, read the rest of Ecclesiastes. It won't take you probably half an hour to read it. Building and music and entertainment and visitations. He had comedians, he had business, he had food, he had wine, he had women, he had philosophy, he had reading, and everything. But was Solomon satisfied and happy and content in all the things he did? Why did he say all of this is meaningless? Was he trying to find fulfillment in the world? Remember, everything under the sun is right here. Us. And, you know, he was looking at worldly pursuits, but that's kind of like putting tunnel vision in your eyes. So when Solomon uses the phrase, there is nothing new under the sun, and he uses it 28 times, that statement suggests that his vision, his being was focused on the here and now, and on this earthly life, and on the present time. So here at this point, it seems to have no other focus. And he's not denying that there's pleasures in life, because there are pleasures in life, and there's many to be enjoyed. No question about it. But, you know, Solomon, at this point, was limiting his focus on the world, under the sun. So where's God in the picture here? He's not. Worldly pleasures focus on the here and now, but not what happens when one closes his eyes in this earthly existence. You know, the world today is progressed in terms of science and medicine and technology and so much more, but it hasn't solved the problems of this world. Our existence, you know, why am I here? What am I? Where will I go? And when you talk to people about that, they look at you, man, you're nuts. Why are you talking to me like that? You know? And you know something? Man's not going to solve these problems. They're not going to do it. And there's all sorts of pleasures today. There's music, there's TV, there's entertainment, there's gadgets. It's made life easier, there's no question about it, and more pleasurable. But these things take one's focus off the weightier questions. You know, do we ever talk about God to people? Do we ever think of God and his creation, the beauty of this universe? Our worldly focus gives us tunnel vision and misplaces our priorities. And I'm not saying there's bad things in the world. There is, and there's also good things. So Solomon, as he searches for meaning in his life, goes through many stages as he strives to make sense out of this life. He literally tries just about everything under the sun. In the next chapter, 2:10, he says, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasures. But among or through this pessimism comes truth. Chapter 3, probably one of the most quoted of scriptures. There's a time for everything, a time to die, a time, everybody is quite familiar with that. But it actually leads to optimism at this point and a greater understanding of life. Why? Because Solomon brought God into the picture. We see the mood and tone of life change. Ignorance can be overcome by knowledge of God. And in 3rd chapter, verse 11, he says, he, meaning God, he has made everything beautiful in its time. He also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. There are mysteries in life, and we'll never know all the answers. We think sometimes we might, but we don't. Everything that happens at the time God chooses. And this is hard for us to believe sometimes, isn't it? Particularly when tragedy strikes. Herein lies the choice. And God calls us to choose his way, not the world's way. We surrender to God, to his control. And all our choices have consequences as we are accountable and responsible to God for what we do and who we are. I don't know if you've gone past my house, but there's this old sign that I got from a guy who's passed on. And it says, after judgment, or after death comes the judgment. And when I put my house up for sale, when my wife got sick, I sold it in 2 days and discovered I had no place to go, which wasn't a real bright idea. The real estate guy said, take that sign down. Nobody wants to see it. I said, no, I won't take it down. And that might have been a blessing in disguise. Otherwise, you could live in the back of a car. There's not a room for a bed in there. All of us at some point in our lives must make decisions. Proverbs says, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. Later in Luke 12, Jesus says, not to fear those who can kill the body, but to fear him who after killing the body has the power to throw you into hell. Ecclesiastes has the power to cause us to examine ourselves, the wrong ways and the right ways of life. Is it pessimism or is it optimism? Is it the world or is it God? Look at life today. Where is this world heading? There's misery, there's war, there's hatred, there's anti-Semitism, there's confusion over male and female, there's changing language, there's political turmoil, there's inability to arrive at truth, even if truth exists in this world. There's loss of authority over one's family, especially over children. There's emerging AI in all aspects of our lives. Are you confused? Are you uncomfortable? Are you unsure? Sometimes I am, I can admit it, just a touch. Solomon had everything in his life. Wine, women, song, and a lot more. And he tells us he's rich, he's powerful, he's authoritative, everything under the sun. Yet he said everything was meaningless. Many may say, boys, I wish I could trade places with him. I'd be so happy. But why was Solomon so disturbed in spirit? With all he had, there was still a void in his life. And he knew it. And, as I was doing this, and you listen to the news sometimes, and you watch, these rich and famous people. But I wonder if millionaires and billionaires, the rich and the famous, are as content and happy as people might imagine they are. When we look at marriage and divorce rates, if you get married in Hollywood last year, you're probably doing well. So Solomon is not so much condemning the pleasures of this world as there's much good in it, but he's finding that the pleasures, the riches, the power, all of this stuff does not fulfill a piece of his life that is empty. Most often, too, the pleasures of life lead to sin, and what does that do for the soul? Three phrases keep repeating. Meaningless, nothing new under the sun, chasing after the wind. And all of this suggests that life without God is not fulfilling. It's not fulfilling any of your spiritual needs. I think I was talking to somebody last night, and they were talking about some place not too far from here where they're going to have tarot pack readings. Stay away, folks. Stay away from Ouija boards and all this kind of stuff. Can you imagine? In 1:9, Solomon says, "What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. Generations come, generations go." Repetition of the same behavior over and over until one recognizes the need for God. God has put into man's heart a heart for truth and a need for God. You can have the world and all its pleasures, but still not be content. Solomon also knows that man is a social creature and is not meant to be isolated and alone. I think it's in 4:9. He says, "Two are better than one because they have a good return for their work." And it goes on to say, if one falls, the other can pick them up. And if there's not somebody to pick you up, you could be in trouble, And, it's so true. We know Solomon has something like 700 wives and 300 concubines. I say, woo, why did God allow this? And we talk about this sometimes in our Bible study. God didn't so much allow it as he permitted it. And the question is, in your various marriage vows, it says, forsaking all others. Might it be that Solomon, who was wise in certain areas of his life, was not so wise when it came to some of the women because they worshipped other gods, and that led him astray. And he defied the first commandment, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." But it also shows that multiple wives and partners do not usually lead to a happy family life. When you look at many biblical characters in the Bible that had more than one wife, they also have a lot of problems. So it's a warning. So through a process like a debate with oneself, we begin to realize that all that glitters isn't gold. Our eyes sometimes are bigger than our stomach. What was sweet in the mouth is now sour in the stomach. I've been to Las Vegas and I've been to Reno, and I'd never go again. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas until you bring STDs home. It's the end all and be all, There's action, there's glitter, there's light, there's food, there's gambling, there's excessive pleasures. Why is it called Sin City? It's a place devoid of ethics and morality and common sense, and it leads people to do things that they might not otherwise do. Bottom line, what does it do for you? And it's expensive. So how do you and I relate to Solomon? You might say, well, that's over, 2,600 years ago. Times have changed. We know so much more today. Science explains lots of mysteries. There's way more education today, more knowledge, better medicine, better technology, better everything. But back to 1:9, what has been will be again. Nothing new under the sun. But that statement is not God's view, it's man's view. And time passes. Instead of chariots, we have cars. It's manual labor, we have machines. It's doing the same thing. And by the way, I like machines, It's just new and faster and easier at the end of the day. But there's still, at the end of the day, the same concerns that people have had over the years. All life away from God is meaningless. And there's no question that one may be content by the world's standards and even be at peace, or maybe think they're at peace. But what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and he loses his soul? There's Solomon I'll just read it again. In chapter 1 it says, the sun rises, sun sets, and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning. All streams flow into the stream, And that sounds really negative. But think of it this way. If I'm out hunting and I've got a compass, and it points north that way once, or maybe that way once, I'm lost. And God has given us rules and laws of physics And it's really a comfort when you think of it. It may seem dreary, but it's not. It's actually a gift from God to help us in this life. So Solomon's saying God's in control, and he has set everything in motion. And there's a keen sense of dependency that we should have. We can count on certain things in this life, and that's going to bring us peace and comfort. Is there anything new under the sun? There's only one thing, and it's this. That's new birth when you accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. You become a new creation. Today, people think philosophy and socialism and great men will solve the problems of this world. All you have to do is kind of look south of the border, and see what's going on there. But have they ever in human history, been around for 6,000 years, give or take, have we solved any of the problems? Are we getting better or getting worse? We've got better bombs and ways to kill people, but that's about it. And education is not necessarily a bad thing. But the more we know sometimes, the more we suffer unintended consequences. They invented the A-bomb, did the job quite well. We have AI now, and that's all you hear on the news is that artificial intelligence doing this, that, and everything. And it's been with us for a while. My car talks to me more than anybody. Turn left, do this, don't do that. We have cell phones. And when you see the kids, they're losing the sense of communication. There's computers. There's all sorts of stuff. There's certainly good in perspective, but there's also many negative outcomes of these. And Solomon in Proverbs wants to warn people not to repeat the mistakes of the past. And the question is, do we listen? Are there therefore benefits from what's happened in the past? And, in school you're always taught, history, we're not going to repeat the mistakes. Well, we keep repeating them. We just do it bigger and better and faster. I think many of us go through life as we experiment with many things. And I'm not here to make confession, by the way, but we make mistakes. But when I was a child, I thought I was a child. And when I became a man, I put away childish things. And that applies to women too, by the way. It's through experience, however long it takes, that one matures and comes to the realization that we need God. In Hebrews 1:1, in the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times in many ways. And in 2:1 in the same chapter, we must pay more careful attention. By the way, the NIV is not noted for grammatical sometimes, But so we've heard that, and they don't want us to drift away because it's easy to do sometimes. So 2,000 years we've had God's words, and through the Holy Scriptures, particularly the New Testament, and it's a guide for life. We have commandments for a righteous life, even rules and regulations for health and food and law, social regulations, and so many others. But today when we look at the churches, they consist mainly of older people. We've gone through life, and I may suggest that many of us have made many of the mistakes that Solomon probably made. In effect, why are you here? What am I going to do? Because we have God in our lives, we've become aware of what we are, who our Creator is, who Jesus Christ is, and what He's done to save sinners. And this is the heart of the Christian faith. The world's drifting away from God. When AI now constructs its soulless messages and sermons, do you think we might be in trouble? When governments will forbid public prayer in institutions, command pastors and others not to mention Jesus Christ in public, as it might offend non-Christians. When you stand for God's word and you're branded as a hate monger, a right-winger, or against diversity, when boys think they're girls and vice versa, something's wrong. Something's big time wrong. But in the end, Solomon puts his life into perspective. He reaches a conclusion. And I'm going to give you that conclusion right now. And it's in chapter 12, verse 13 and 14. He says, look, now all has been heard. Here is a conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it's good or whether it's evil. And when you remember the story of the prodigal son? It's basically the same story. Basically he did what Solomon did. But he returned to God. And that, again, is one of the main things. I want to end with I think it's Isaiah 46. And I do realize the context here. And, but it actually applies to us. And I know it's probably for the Jews, but it says this. Remember this, fix it in mind, take it to heart, you rebels. Remember the former things of long ago. I'm God, and there is no other. I'm God, and there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. May God bless this message. And folks, we're going to end with